Hello, welcome to Guide London. My name's Nick Salmond. I'm a Blue Badge tourist guide for London. I'm one of 600 members of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides. That's the association that runs the Guide London website. Thank you for joining us today. You're joining us for one of our 3 times weekly live broadcasts on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We're not allowed to guide in London at the moment because the city's in lockdown. So we're trying to bring a little bit of London to you through these live broadcasts. If you were able to join us on Monday, you would have had a trip around some of the weirder and strange things that you can find when you wander around London. And if you missed that, you can find that broadcast along with all our broadcasts on our YouTube and on our Facebook pages. All you have to do is go and search for Guide London and you should be able to find all the broadcasts archived there. Now, today we're looking at 2 museums in London. London has many fabulous museums, some very large museums like the British Museum and some very small museums like the Charles Dickens Museum, which is based in one of his houses, one of the places he used to live. Today, I'm joined by 2 London Blue Badge guides. Aaron Hunter is joining us, as
Hello.
is Themis Halvantzi-Stringer. And they're going to take us through 2 museums in the South Kensington area of the city. Aaron's going to start off by taking us to the Natural History Museum. That's the museum that deals with life on Earth and tells the story of life on Earth. And then we'll move next door to look at the Science Museum. And Themis is going to talk about some important computing pioneers, 5 very important people who were instrumental in the development of computing technology. You might think it's a 20th century invention. In fact, it goes back a lot longer than that. We are broadcasting live, so if you've got a question, then please do put it in the comments in the Facebook page or on YouTube. Tell us where you're watching from as well. And if you've been to the museums, tell us what you enjoyed seeing at the museums in London. So I'm now going to hand over to Aaron, who's going to start off with the Natural History Museum. Aaron.
Well, hello everybody. My name's Aaron Hunter. I'm a Blue Badge guide for London, and I'm also a paleontologist. And I have the great pleasure of talking to you today about one of the great museums of the world. It is the Natural History Museum, London. And it's part of the big 3 museums that include the Natural History Museum in Paris and the Smithsonian Natural History Museum in Washington, DC. And between those 3, they're the 3 largest collections. And the Natural History Museum London has over 80 million specimens. Now, I'm not going to show all of those to you all today. But what I'm actually going to be doing is going to take you on a tour of the museum. But first, I'm going to show you some of the history. And our story actually starts in 1851 with the Great Exhibition, the exhibition for the work of industry of all nations. It was a large greenhouse in Hyde Park, a park in central London. And it was an exhibition that was to show off various innovations, science, nature, technology. And it was the brainchild of Prince Albert, who was the husband of Queen Victoria. Now, what happened was when this exhibition finished, people didn't know what to do. The actual greenhouse later on, the structure was moved down to southeast London. And what happened was Prince Albert had the idea of having an area of London, area of West London, being developed using the kind of the resources from this particular exhibition. And so this area of South Kensington that we're visiting today virtually is this area called Albertopolis that's developed out of the Great Exhibition. It has the Royal Albert Hall, which you'll see down there. And it also has the museums we're going to be talking about today, the Science Museum, the South Kensington Museum, which later became Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Science Museum and the Natural History Museum, London. But actually, the story I'm going to begin with, Natural History Museum, starts another part of London, because it moved there. Originally, it was up in Bloomsbury area of London, and we have the British Museum. Now, the British Museum today is our National Museum of Archaeology, Antiquities and Culture. And that was started from an actual collection of one man, Sir Hans Sloane, an Irish physician. Now, what he had something that everyone, or particularly rich people, had in those days, which was a cabinet of curiosities. You had it in your large house or your home, you brought your friends over, and you showed off all of those objects. And when he passed away, he didn't want this collection to be broken up, and so he gave it to the nation for the fee of £20,000. And so from that, the British Museum was created, the world's first publicly accessible museum. However, that original collection included lots of natural science objects, including things that Sir Hans Sloane was interested in, including lots of plants. And you can see some from his original plant specimens that he brought back from the Caribbean and other parts of the world. So why, if you go to the British Museum, do you not see any fossils or living things? Well, it's because the museum moved, and that was because of a particular man called Sir Richard Owen. Now, Sir Richard Owen is the man who is credited for one very famous thing. He is the man who invented the name dinosaur. He was a paleontologist like me, and he was keeper of natural history. And he had an ambition to move the museum to South Kensington, have a separate department or separate museum. But he was also involved in naming the dinosaur. So the name dinosaur really comes from London. And in fact, part of that was creating models, which are now found in Southeast London in Crystal Palace Park. And today, if you go to the Natural History Museum, there are lots of dinosaurs on display and also marine reptiles. And actually today, if you go there, there's also a moving Tyrannosaurus Rex you can see if you go in there. Now, the museum itself eventually opened its doors in 1881. And if you look at the Natural History Museum now, you'd be forgiven into believing that this was, in fact, some sort of cathedral. In fact, people ask me, is this a cathedral? And I say, no, it's a Natural History Museum. But it was designed to be like a cathedral of nature. And Alfred Waterhouse, the architect, when he created this museum, when he built this museum out of terracotta, it's beautiful color, you look at it and you'll see gargoyles on the outside. In fact, if you stand at the front and you look over to your what is your right-hand side, you will see gargoyles that are really sort of extinct animals, pterodactyls, strange beasts from the geological past. And if you then look on the other side, on the left-hand side, you will see things that we're familiar today, like big cats and things like that. And so when you come to the museum, you'll see the nature on the outside. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you into the museum and show you some of the insides of this spectacular building. So here we are at the beautiful entrance to the Natural History Museum. We're going to go up the steps and we're going to go through the door. And what a surprise you find when you go in, because you go in through the door and you will see this beautiful hall, this great hall that we now call the Heinz Hall. Now, in this hall, you will find monkeys climbing up ladders. You will find fish and fossil fish on the walls. You can see them all around the building. And those columns you see there, they are the represent fossil plants from coal age plants, 300 million years old. And you'll also see living plants as well. But then if you look up onto the ceiling, what you will see is a series of panels that show plants. And if you look at a close-up of one of those, what you will see are some of the plants involved in what Hans Sloane was interested in, the plants of tobacco and the plants of coffee. And it was thought also, is widely believed, that Hans Sloane popularized a chocolate milk as well. Now, when we look at the Great Hall, if you actually look at the space, we've had a real problem with what to put in this particular space. When it first opened, there was nothing in there, a big open space. So what did they put inside the Natural History Museum? Well, first of all, they put a sperm whale in there. And here we see a sperm whale in the center of the gallery. Then later on, we decided to put in a whole series of elephants. Here we see a series of elephants and birds on display. Then in 1979, a very famous dinosaur arrived, Dippy, the Diplodocus or Diplodocus. This is actually not a real bone of a dinosaur. Those bones are in Pennsylvania, in the Pittsburgh Museum, the Carnegie Museum. But this is a replica that was given to Edward VII, the king. Therefore, it was an important specimen. And it was there until 2017, when it was moved on tour around the country. It's currently in the northern English city of Rochdale, and soon, hopefully, it will move to Norwich Cathedral in the east of England. And what was it replaced with? A whale again. We've come full circle, but this time it's a blue whale, the largest organism ever to exist in the history of planet Earth. And in fact, if you go to Natural History Museum, I always like people to visit the Whale Hall, because the Whale Hall has a model of an actual whale. And the picture you'll see next is actually a picture that shows you when people actually created this amazing model of these whales. Now, the Natural History Museum has another role. It is a scientific institution, and in fact, it is a place of scientific research. We have the Darwin Centre, and in the Darwin Centres 1 and 2, you will find a whole series of animals preserved in jars from around the world, where we extract DNA to do sequencing and understand how animals are related to each other. We also have all of these plants. We have Hans Sloane's original collection in there as well. And we also have the herbariums, we have insects, and we have one of the most important fossil collections in the world. And of course, we have big and small, and we still do have a dinosaur on display because we have Sophie. Sophie comes from Wyoming, and she is the best preserved dinosaur, Stegosaurus dinosaur we have, and it's part of ongoing research by the Natural History Museum, London. Now, what I'm going to do now is go next door, because next door to the Natural History Museum, we have London Science Museum. Now, the Science Museum started life as the South Kensington Museum, and changed its name on the turn of the century to the Victorian Albert Museum. Now, the V&A is the National Museum of Decorative Arts, Sculpture and Paintings, but part of the original museum included scientific instruments and inventions. Eventually, it got too big, and we moved across the road, the Science Museum, to create a new museum there. That museum has amazing treasures inside, which includes the world's earliest steam engines, and the earliest locomotives you can see on the slide here, and some of the first computers. Now, as you go into the Science Museum, there is a very great gallery in there, which is called The Making of the Modern World. This gallery contains all the achievements that the UK has done. It includes early steam engines, early computers. It includes penicillin and a model of the DNA double helix. But I'm now passing on to my friend and colleague Themis, who's going to be talking more about that computing history.
Hello, everyone. My name is Themis Halvantzi-Stringer, and thank you, Aaron, for the introduction to the Science Museum. Now, I'm also a Blue Badge tourist guide, but I originally trained as an archaeologist. So where Aaron stops his digging, I start mine. We go paleontology, archaeology. And you might think, well, what on earth is an archaeologist going to tell me about science and about computing pioneers? Well, one of the first things that you learn in archaeology is how to make connections, how to connect people between different cultures, different societies, different civilizations, even different objects. And this is something that I use a lot in my day-to-day guiding. I make connections between different things. So I would like to share a connection, actually two connections, that make this group of 5 people become one team. They are 5 people who were all born in London, and they all share a love of mathematics, engines, and finally computing. So we're going to start with the first person. This is a lady, surprisingly. She's a 19th century socialite, aristocratic lady, and her name was Augusta or Ada King. She was the Countess of Lovelace. Now, what a fantastic name, Ada Lovelace. She was actually the only legitimate child of Lord Byron, who was a very famous romantic poet of the 19th century. And Ada had a very unusual upbringing for a girl of her age. She learned very much about science and mathematics, and also she learned languages. And that helped her very much because later on she was asked to translate an article from French into English. The article was called Sketch of the Analytical Engine, and it described a machine that could actually do some calculations. As Ada started doing her translations, she realized that she wanted to make comments to the text, and she did exactly that, where very often she would include her own mathematical equations or algorithms, as they were known. She also suggested that this engine could have a method to repeat a series of instructions. Now that, in the modern computing lingo, is called looping, and it is the basis of all computer programming. So effectively, she became one of the very first computer programmers. This goes to all the people who say that women can't code. Our next connection is somebody who knew Ada Lovelace and was contemporary of hers. His name was Charles Babbage. Now, Charles Babbage met Ada Lovelace at a party. And they started talking together. They realized they got on very, very well. They both had a love of mathematics. They both talked about engines and different calculating machines. And it was actually Charles Babbage who asked Ada Lovelace to do the translation of the article. He was interested in machines that could make reliable calculations with the turn of a handle. And that was because he was fed up with correcting mistakes that were done by humans. So he came up with a series of different machines, and he described them, but he never actually built them. One of them, the analytical engine, you can actually see in the Science Museum, sorry about that, in the Science Museum, but it is not the original machine. It was described by Charles Babbage, but it was never built. It was built only at the beginning of the 20th century, following his designs and his methods. Now, if we fast forward to the middle of the 20th century, our next connection, our next Londoner, is a gentleman called Alan Turing. Now, he was known to his friends and colleagues as the professor. That's because he was actually a professor at Cambridge University. He was a professor of mathematics. In 1936, he presented a paper where he was describing a machine that was capable of computing anything that was computable. And he very modestly called it the Universal Turing Machine. So he was very, very well equipped to help the British government with their war effort, because in 1939, the Second World War breaks out. And it is essential for the British government to read the codes, the encrypted messages that are sent by the German High Command using a machine called the Enigma to all the different parts of the Nazi army. Now, the Enigma was originally explored and described by the Polish Cipher Bureau, and they actually helped Turing in the original parts of the stage of the project. But it was him who actually specified an electromechanical machine, which he called the bomb, which would break the Enigma code. And that would be fantastic for the war effort. This machine was effectively the very first ever computer because it performed a chain of logical calculations. So you do the best for your country, you invent the very first ever computer, you break the Enigma code, and you only become famous when Benedict Cumberbatch plays you in The Imitation Game. So that's how fame works, I'm afraid. Now, Alan Turing, you can say, was quite lucky because he got to be played by Benedict Cumberbatch. No such luck for our next connection, a gentleman called Tommy Flowers. Now, Tommy Flowers was a true East Londoner. He was born in Poplar. He had a very working class background. His father was just a bricklayer, but Tommy was brilliant at mechanical engineering. He took evening classes at the University of London, got his degree, and started working for the post office in the telecommunications department. When the Second World War broke out, he started working at Bletchley Park, the encrypting and encoding center in Britain, together with Alan Turing. And because Turing had already broken the Enigma code, we're now in 1943, the Nazi High Command designed an even more complicated ciphering machine, which they called the Lawrence SZ. And it was up to Tommy Flowers to break that machine. In order to do that, he and his team created a new machine, which he named the Colossus. It was absolutely massive as a piece of engineering work. And it was effectively the first programmable electronic computer. And guess what? He had to pay for it out of his own pocket. He paid for the materials because Bletchley Park officials said that they didn't have enough funds to give him to continue his research. After the Second World War, he got given a grant of about £1,000, but that was nowhere near enough to cover his costs. And he remained pretty much unknown until the end of the 19th century, when all the Second World War secrets stopped being secrets anymore and people's contributions started coming to life. Now, our very last connection is another Londoner, surprise, surprise, and you should all recognize him. If you don't know him, well, you know what he invented. His name is Sir Tim Berners-Lee, and he invented the World Wide Web, what you see me in at this moment. He was working as a programmer at CERN, which is a research center in Geneva, in Switzerland. And he said that he got fed up with trying to get information from different computer systems and different software. So he came up with the idea of creating a net of computers that would all share the same information system, and it would all be converted into something that everyone could read. And this became the World Wide Web. Understatement of the century, his boss at CERN, when he read his proposal, said, "Oh, well, yeah, it's vague but exciting." Well, this is what it takes to be a famous Briton, to change the world forever, and to allow many people all the experiences that we can get together. If you're interested in any of these things that I've talked about, you can see these machines and many more at the Science Museum in London, hopefully after the lockdown.
Themis and Aaron, thank you so much. Fascinating talks there. And it's great, isn't it, that most of the museums in London are free. So you can go and visit the Natural History Museum and the Science Museum for no cost, hopefully when they reopen. So tell us, Aaron, when the lockdown is finally released, what is the one thing that you're going to rush back and see in the museums?
I think I'm going to rush back first to my lovely Natural History Museum, and I'm going to go behind the scenes, which is possible, and I'm going to pick out my favourite specimen, and that is a piece of amber with a fossil frog preserved in it. And then I'd say I really miss the British Museum and showing. I like to guide families, and I really miss showing families the sort of the Rosetta Stone and the Egyptian and Greek antiquities.
It's amazing, isn't it? You can get so close to these amazing things from our past and just look at them in such detail. What about you, Themis? What's the one place that you are really missing being able to go at the moment?
Well, I'm really missing the British Museum because as an archaeologist, that is really pretty much my main domain. But I very much enjoy going to the Science Museum and to the Natural History Museum as well. And if I was to go back, to rush back and see one thing, I would suggest, well, actually, my favorite would be a small piece of rock. But this rock is special because it comes from the moon. And
wow.
It is the public display in the Science Museum. So everybody has the chance to see it or avoid it.
Wow, amazing things to see in London. So do come and visit when the lockdown is over, and do hire a guide as well, because we'd love to show you some of the wonderful things that you can see all around the city. Now, if you want to catch up with either Aaron or Themis, then the best place to go is our website, guidelondon.org.uk. If you just search for the name, there's Themis's name. So just type that in the search box and that will bring up a little profile, which tells you all about Themis and what she offers. Same with Aaron as well. Just type that in the Find a Guide box. If you want to follow Aaron, I know, Aaron, you're doing some dinosaur walks as well, aren't you? In the Crystal Palace area, which I think is near where you live. So you're putting those on Facebook and YouTube?
Yeah, so I have them on my Facebook page and also on my YouTube page, Science Guide London, and I've been doing tours of the Crystal Palace dinosaurs.
And the Crystal Palace dinosaurs are amazing. Are they 19th century?
They are, and they were created in 1853, not far after that great exhibition, and they are the oldest dinosaur models in the world.
Well, definitely worth going to see if you're in that part of London. Thank you both for joining us today. 2 fascinating talks. Thank you for watching, wherever you're watching in the world. I see we've got comments from all over the world. Do pass this on to your friends as well. I think there was a slight glitch on Facebook when we began, but the whole thing is on YouTube. So if you want to go and see the broadcast, then simply go to our YouTube channel, just search for Guide London. Join us on Friday. On Friday, we've got a very special program, slightly longer than usual, because we're marking the anniversary of VE Day, which is the anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe. We'll be looking at some of the history that led up to the end of the war. We'll be looking at how Londoners marked the day, and also the events that happened after the end of the war, how the war came to an end and what happened then. We'll be having a look and seeing about some of the history of that period of London's history. So do join us for that. But from Themis, from Aaron, and from me for the moment, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.